Hi, I'm Jessica. I thought fathers were protectors, the men who would always stand by their daughters no matter what. Instead, 3 weeks before my wedding, I discovered a letter hidden in my childhood home that shattered everything I believed about my family's love and support. What I found wasn't just harsh words about my choices. It was evidence of a campaign that had been orchestrated behind my back for months, designed to sabotage the most important day of my life. And when I confronted the truth, my own family tried to destroy me completely.
Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you.
The afternoon light streaming through the lace curtains of my childhood bedroom in Riverside, California, felt warm and nostalgic, casting gentle shadows across the hardwood floors I'd walked on for 26 years. It was one of those perfect March days where spring was just beginning to whisper promises of new beginnings, and the air carried the sweet scent of my mother's jasmine garden. I sat cross-legged on my old twin bed, surrounded by wedding planning materials that had consumed my life for the past 8 months. My name is Jessica Martinez, and in exactly 3 weeks, I was supposed to marry Staff Sergeant Michael Chen in what I dreamed would be the perfect military wedding at Fort Hamilton in New York. For months, I'd been the dutiful daughter, consulting my parents on every detail from the flower arrangements to the reception menu. My father, Robert Martinez, had always been my hero, a retired Marine Corps colonel who taught me about honor, integrity, and standing up for what's right. He'd promised to walk me down the aisle with the same pride he'd shown when I graduated from the military academy 5 years earlier. My mother, Elena, had thrown herself into wedding preparations with the enthusiasm of someone planning a royal coronation. Together, we'd spent countless weekends driving to bridal shops, cake tastings, and venue visits, creating what she called the wedding of her dreams for her perfect daughter. As someone who'd served 2 tours in Afghanistan as a logistics officer, I was used to planning complex operations under pressure. But nothing had prepared me for the intricate choreography of a military wedding, especially one that needed to accommodate both my family's traditional Mexican Catholic expectations and Michael's Chinese-American family's customs. The stack of RSVPs on my nightstand showed over 200 confirmed guests, including my entire battalion from Fort Carson, Colorado, where I was currently stationed. My commanding officer had even approved special leave for 12 of my fellow soldiers to serve as my honor guard, a rare privilege that reflected the deep bonds we'd formed during our deployment together. Michael and I had met during a joint training exercise 2 years ago. He was everything my father had always said he wanted for me: honorable, dedicated to service, and deeply committed to family values. Their instant connection over military strategy and shared war stories had convinced me that I'd found not just a husband, but someone who would fit seamlessly into the Martinez family legacy of service. The wedding dress hanging in my closet was my grandmother's, carefully preserved and altered to fit my frame. 3 generations of Martinez women had worn it, and I'd always imagined my father's tears of joy as he lifted the veil to kiss my forehead before placing my hand in Michael's. Everything was perfect, everything was planned, everything was exactly as it should be. I had no idea that in the next 20 minutes, I would discover that everything I believed about my family's support was a carefully constructed lie. I was looking for my grandmother's pearl earrings in my father's study when I accidentally knocked over a stack of papers from his desk. As I bent down to collect the scattered documents, a cream-colored envelope caught my eye. It was addressed in my father's distinctive handwriting to Father Miguel Santos, St. Catherine's Parish. My heart skipped a beat. Father Santos was supposed to officiate our wedding ceremony in 3 weeks. Why would my father be writing to him separately from our official wedding planning? I opened the envelope with trembling fingers, expecting to find ceremony details or perhaps a church donation. Instead, what I found made my blood run cold.
The letter was dated 2 weeks earlier. Dear Father Santos, I am writing to formally request that you refuse to perform the marriage ceremony between my daughter, Jessica Martinez, and Staff Sergeant Michael Chen. After much prayer and consideration, I believe this union would bring dishonor to our family name. I read the words again, my hands shaking violently. My father was asking our priest to cancel my wedding behind my back. But that wasn't the most shocking part. The letter continued. Michael Chen is not the man he pretends to be. I have conducted my own investigation and discovered troubling information Jessica refuses to acknowledge. His family's communist connections in China, his questionable financial dealings, and his lack of true Catholic faith make him unsuitable as a husband. Communist connections, questionable financial dealings, none of this was true. Michael's grandparents had fled China to escape communism. His family owned a restaurant in San Francisco and had been practicing Catholics for generations. My father was fabricating lies about the man I loved. Attached was a second sheet titled Operation Save Jessica, with a detailed timeline of sabotage efforts. My father had documented his attempts to discourage the engagement over 6 months, deliberately scheduling family events to conflict with wedding planning, spreading rumors about Michael's instability among extended family, and even contacting my commanding officer to suggest my emotional state was affecting my military performance. My vision blurred as the magnitude sank in. This wasn't protective concern from a worried father. This was a calculated campaign to destroy my relationship and humiliate me publicly. I found copies of emails to family members asking them to boycott the wedding or convince me to come to my senses. There was even a draft letter to Michael's parents, filled with accusations and demands they call off the engagement to save both families from embarrassment.
I kept reading through my father's papers, my stomach churning with each new revelation. The next document was a detailed dossier on Michael's family, compiled by the private investigator. The file contained bank records, employment history, and even photographs taken without their knowledge outside their San Francisco restaurant. David Ramirez had been thorough in his invasion of privacy. There were transcripts of phone calls he'd somehow recorded, surveillance photos of Michael's younger sister picking up groceries, and even a floor plan of their family home. The level of intrusion was staggering, and the cost breakdown showed my father had paid over $8,000 for this stalking operation. But it got worse, much worse. Attached to the investigator's report was an email chain between my father and several extended family members. The subject line read, Jessica's intervention, coordinated response plan. My uncle Carlos had written, Roberto, I've spoken with my contacts at the base chaplain's office. They're willing to raise concerns about Jessica's judgment if you think it would help delay the ceremony. My Aunt Maria responded, I've already started telling the cousins that Michael seems unstable. Several of them have agreed to express concerns to Jessica about rushing into marriage with someone she barely knows. They were talking about my fiancé like he was a threat to neutralize, coordinating lies and manipulation across our entire extended family. People I'd trusted, relatives who'd smiled at me during family gatherings, were actively conspiring to sabotage my relationship. My mind raced through the past 6 months, reframing every family interaction through this horrible new lens. My father's sudden scheduling conflicts that prevented him from meeting with our wedding planner. My mother's increasingly passive-aggressive comments about rushing into things. The way conversations stopped when I entered rooms at family gatherings. Uncle Carlos's unexpected visit last month when he'd spent an hour asking probing questions about Michael's financial situation and family background. Aunt Maria's concerned phone call 2 weeks ago, suggesting I postpone the wedding to make sure I was making the right choice.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
Even my teenage cousin Sophia had been recruited into the deception. I found text message screenshots where my father had coached her on what to say when she visited. Just mention that your friend's sister got divorced after marrying someone from a different cultural background. Don't make it obvious, just plant the seed of doubt. They'd turned family dinners into psychological warfare, each interaction carefully designed to undermine my confidence and create anxiety about my relationship. What I'd interpreted as loving concern was actually coordinated manipulation. The most devastating discovery was a group chat called Save Our Jessica that included my parents, 3 aunts, 2 uncles, and my paternal grandmother. For months, they'd been
The sound of my father's car pulling into the driveway sent ice through my veins. I quickly gathered all the documents, my hands still trembling from what I'd discovered, and arranged them in a neat stack on his desk. There was no hiding from this conversation, no pretending I hadn't seen the evidence of his months-long campaign to destroy my happiness. I heard his familiar footsteps in the hallway, the same steady Marine Corps cadence that had comforted me as a child when he'd check on me before bed. Now those footsteps felt ominous, belonging to a stranger who'd been living a double life under my own roof. "Jessica, I saw your car outside. How's the wedding planning going, mija?" His voice carried the same warmth it always had, the practiced tone of a loving father who called me by his pet name. The casual affection felt like a slap across the face, given what I now knew. He appeared in the doorway of his study, still wearing his weekend golf clothes, his face lighting up with what looked like genuine pleasure at seeing me. For a moment, I almost doubted what I'd found. This was the man who'd taught me to ride a bike, who'd proudly pinned my lieutenant bars on my uniform, who'd cried when I deployed to Afghanistan. But the documents on his desk told a different story. "Dad," I said, my voice steadier than I expected, "we need to talk." His expression shifted slightly as he noticed the papers spread across his workspace. "What's all this? You know I don't like people going through my personal things." "Your personal things?" I held up the letter to Father Santos. "Is my wedding ceremony your personal business now?" The color drained from his face so quickly, I thought he might collapse right there in the doorway. His mouth opened and closed twice before any words came out, and when they did, his voice had lost all its warmth. "Jessica, I can explain. Sometimes documents can look worse than they actually are when taken out of context." The audacity was breathtaking. He was suggesting I'd misunderstood a letter where he explicitly asked our priest to refuse to marry me, calling my fiancé unsuitable and requesting the ceremony be canceled. "Then explain the private investigator," I said, pulling out David Ramirez's invoice. "Explain the $8,000 you spent having Mikhail's family stalked and photographed without their knowledge." His military posture crumbled. The confident Marine colonel I'd always known was replaced by something smaller, more desperate. "You don't understand the situation, mija. I was trying to protect you." "Protect me from what? From marrying a good man who loves me? From being happy? From making the biggest mistake of your life?" The words exploded out of him with surprising venom. "You're throwing away everything our family stands for, everything I taught you about choosing the right kind of person." There it was, the real reason behind all the deception. Not protection, but control. Not love, but prejudice wrapped in parental authority. The right kind of person? I stood up, the documents clutched in my hand. "You mean someone who isn't Chinese? Someone who doesn't challenge my idea of who I should marry?" His face flushed red. This isn't about race, Jessica," my father repeated, but his voice wavered with uncertainty.
This is about what's best for your future. I pulled out the group chat screenshots, the ones labeled Save Our Jessica. Then explain this. Explain how coordinating with the entire family to sabotage my relationship is what's best for my future. His confident military bearing cracked further as he recognized his own words in the messages. The strategic planning, the deliberate manipulation, the cold calculation of turning family members into weapons against my happiness. Dad, you literally wrote a timeline called Operation Save Jessica. You hired a private investigator to stalk Michael's family. You coached my teenage cousin on how to plant doubts in my mind. I held up each piece of evidence. How do you explain asking Uncle Carlos to have the base chaplain question my judgment? My father's face cycled through emotions too quickly to track. Surprise at being caught, anger at my defiance, and something that looked dangerously close to panic as he realized the full scope of what I'd discovered. Jessica, you're taking this all out of context. Sometimes protecting someone you love requires difficult decisions. Protecting me? I interrupted, pulling out the bank statement showing payment to the investigator. You spent $8,000 having Michael's family surveilled like criminals? You have photographs of his sister buying groceries, Dad. Floor plans of their home. How is that protection? He reached for the documents, but I stepped back, keeping the evidence against my chest. Those are private family matters that you shouldn't. Private family matters? The hypocrisy was staggering. My wedding is a private family matter too, but that didn't stop you from writing to our priest behind my back, asking him to refuse to marry us. My father's jaw tightened in a way I recognized from my childhood, the look he got when his authority was challenged. But this wasn't a teenager breaking curfew. This was an adult woman discovering that her father had orchestrated a months-long deception campaign. You want to know what Michael really is. He's a security risk, Jessica. His family has connections we can't trust. I've seen his financial records. You mean the financial records you obtained illegally through a private investigator? The same records that show a middle-class family running a restaurant, paying taxes, and contributing to their community? You're being naive. He moved closer, using his physical presence to try to intimidate me the way he had when I was younger. You don't understand the complexities of military marriages, the scrutiny that comes with your security clearance. Don't you dare lecture me about military marriages or security clearances, I said, my own voice taking on the authority I'd learned from him. I'm a commissioned officer with 2 combat deployments. I know exactly what scrutiny comes with my clearance, and I know that Michael passed his own background check to become a staff sergeant. The mention of my military experience seemed to deflate him slightly. He'd always been proud of my service, bragging to his friends about his daughter, the officer. My father's face hardened at my question, his military bearing returning as he shifted from defense to offense. Betray you? Everything I've done has been to protect you from making a decision you'll regret for the rest of your life. Protect me by lying to me? By turning our entire family against my fiancé? By having his family stalked like criminals? My voice rose despite my efforts to stay calm. How is any of that protection? You're too emotional to see this clearly, he said, his tone taking on the condescending edge I remembered from arguments during my teenage years. You're not thinking like the intelligent officer I raised. You're thinking like a lovesick girl who's willing to throw away her heritage for some passing infatuation. The dismissal stung more than I expected. He was reducing my 2-year relationship, my carefully considered decision to marry a man I'd served alongside, to a teenage crush that clouded my judgment. This conversation is over, I said, gathering the documents. I'm taking this evidence to Michael. He deserves to know what you've been doing to his family. My father stepped between me and the door, his 6-foot frame blocking my exit.
You're not taking those documents anywhere. Those are private family communications that don't concern outsiders. Outsiders? The word hit like a physical blow. You're talking about my fiancé, the man I'm going to marry in 3 weeks. No, he said, quietly, but with absolute certainty, you're not. The finality in his voice sent ice through my veins. This wasn't just about sabotaging my wedding anymore. He was making it clear that he would do whatever it took to stop the ceremony from happening. What do you mean I'm not? His smile was cold, calculating, nothing like the warm expression I'd grown up seeing. Jessica, I've spent 30 years in the military. I know how to handle security threats and inappropriate relationships that could compromise an officer's career. Are you threatening me? I'm stating facts. Your commanding officer at Fort Carson has already received some concerning information about your judgment and emotional stability. Questions are being raised about whether your relationship is affecting your ability to perform your duties effectively. My blood ran cold. He'd already contacted my commanding officer, already planted seeds of doubt about my military competence. In the Army, questions about an officer's judgment could derail an entire career. You contacted Colonel Harrison? The betrayal cut deeper than everything else combined. My military career was sacred to me, something I'd built independently of his influence and reputation. I made some calls to people who care about your future. Military families look out for each other, even when it means making difficult decisions. His voice carried the righteousness of someone who believed he was saving me from myself. Those difficult decisions include destroying my reputation with my commanding officer, sabotaging my career because you don't approve of who I'm marrying? He moved closer, using his physical presence to intimidate me the way he had when I was younger and had challenged his authority. But I was not a child anymore, and I had my own military training to draw upon. Your career will survive this minor setback if you make the right choice now. But
Within hours of our confrontation, my phone started ringing continuously. First, it was my mother, her voice strained with what sounded like genuine distress. Jessica, your father told me about your conversation. You need to come home so we can discuss this as a family. Then Uncle Carlos called, his tone more authoritative. Mija, I heard you found some paperwork that upset you. Sometimes things look different on paper than they do in real life. Your father loves you and just wants what's best. Aunt Maria was next, her approach more emotional. Jessica, sweetheart, the whole family is worried about you. We've all noticed how stressed you've been about this wedding. Maybe it's time to step back and really think about whether you're ready for such a big commitment. Each conversation followed the same pattern. Minimize what I'd discovered, question my emotional state, and suggest that my father's deception was actually loving concern. They were executing the same coordinated response strategy I'd read about in their group chat, turning my discovery of their betrayal into evidence of my instability. The calls escalated when my phone rang with a number I recognized from Fort Carson. It was my commanding officer, Colonel Harrison, calling on a Sunday evening. Never a good sign. Martinez, I've received some concerning reports about your current situation. I understand there are some family issues affecting your judgment and potentially your security clearance. I think we need to discuss this when you return to base. My father had followed through with his threat. He'd contacted my commanding officer, painting my refusal to accept his sabotage as evidence of emotional instability and poor judgment. In the military, questions about an officer's decision-making could destroy a career. Sir, I can explain the situation. There's been some misinformation. We'll discuss it in my office Tuesday morning. Until then, I'm advising you to avoid making any major personal decisions that could further compromise your standing. The message was clear. Don't proceed with the wedding or face potential military consequences. After I hung up, my phone buzzed with a text from my cousin Sophia, the teenager who'd been coached to plant doubts about Michael. Jessica, I'm sorry. Grandpa Roberto made me say those things about mixed marriages. I didn't want to, but he said it was to protect you. At least one family member had a conscience, but her confession revealed how deep the manipulation went. Even the youngest family members had been recruited into the deception campaign. My phone rang again. This time it was Father Santos from St. Catherine's Parish. His voice was gentle but firm. Jessica, my child, I've been praying about your situation. Your father has shared some very troubling information about your fiancé's background that could affect your spiritual welfare and the sanctity of the marriage. I cannot, in good conscience, perform a ceremony when such serious doubts exist. They'd succeeded. The priest who was supposed to marry us was now refusing to perform the ceremony based on lies my father had fed him. 3 weeks before my wedding, I no longer had an.
After hanging up with Michael, I sat in my apartment staring at the evidence spread across my coffee table, feeling more alone than I had since my first deployment to Afghanistan. But then, I remembered something my drill sergeant had taught me during officer training. When you're surrounded, you don't surrender. You find your allies and fight smarter. I called the one person I knew would give me honest advice without family politics getting in the way. Captain Sarah Mitchell had been my roommate at the military academy and was now stationed at Fort Bragg. When I explained the situation, her response was immediate and decisive. Jessica, what your father is doing is harassment and potentially illegal. He's using military channels to spread false information about your character and judgment. That's not family concern, that's systematic character assassination. Sarah had grown up in a military family too and understood the culture of using connections and influence. But she also understood the legal boundaries that shouldn't be crossed, even by protective parents. I know a military attorney at JAG who specializes in cases involving abuse of military networks for personal vendettas. Captain Rodriguez has handled situations where family members or former service members tried to damage active duty careers through false reporting. Within 2 hours, I was on a video call with Captain Elena Rodriguez, a sharp-eyed JAG attorney who listened to my story with professional detachment. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair and shook her head. Ms. Martinez, what your father has done constitutes harassment through official channels and potentially filing false reports with commanding officers. The fact that he's coordinated this across multiple bases and involved private investigators makes it even more serious. She explained that I had legal protections as an active duty service member against exactly this type of retaliation and character assassination. The military took a dim view of people using official channels to settle personal disputes or manipulate personnel decisions. We can file a formal complaint through the Inspector General's office. They investigate cases where military networks are abused for personal purposes. Your father may be retired, but he's still subject to certain regulations about how he interacts with active duty personnel. But Captain Rodriguez also connected me with someone even more valuable. Through her network, she introduced me to Sergeant Major Patricia Kim, a career soldier who ran a support group for military personnel dealing with family rejection due to interracial relationships. Jessica, you're not the first service member to face this exact situation, Sergeant Major Kim told me during our phone conversation. Military families can be especially resistant to change, especially when it comes to interracial marriages. The combination of traditional values and institutional authority can create perfect storms of family sabotage. She'd seen cases where parents used military connections to try to break up relationships they disapproved of, always framing their interference as concern for their children's careers or security clearances. The good news is that you have rights and resources. The bad news is that family manipulation campaigns like this usually get worse before they get better. Your father has invested too much time and money in this campaign to back down easily. Through Sergeant Major Kim, I connected with other soldiers who'd faced similar family opposition. Staff Sergeant Maria Santos had been disowned by her family for marrying outside her race. only to have her battalion brothers walk her down the aisle. Lieutenant Commander James Park had faced years of family harassment before his Navy crew became his chosen family. Each story followed a similar pattern: initial family sabotage, escalating pressure through military channels, and ultimately finding support within the military community when biological family failed to provide it. The military family is often more loyal than blood family, Staff Sergeant Santos told me. When push comes to shove, the people who've served alongside you understand honor and commitment better than relatives who've never worn the uniform. That gave me an idea. If my father could use his military connections to sabotage my wedding, maybe I could use mine to save it.
2 weeks before my wedding date, I stood in Colonel Harrison's office at Fort Carson, flanked by Captain Rodriguez from JAG, and armed with documentation that would clear my name once and for all. The Inspector General's investigation had moved with surprising speed once they realized a retired officer was systematically abusing military channels for personal vendettas. "Martinez, I owe you an apology," Colonel Harrison said, reviewing the IG's preliminary findings. "It appears the concerns raised about your judgment and stability were part of a coordinated campaign of harassment by your father. This is completely unacceptable behavior from any former service member." The investigation had uncovered the full scope of my father's network manipulation. He'd contacted not just my commanding officer, but also Michael's chain of command, the base chaplain's office, and even tried to reach personnel at our security clearance investigation unit. Each contact had been carefully crafted to sound like legitimate concern while systematically undermining both our careers. The IG is recommending formal action against your father for abuse of military networks and filing false reporting. His veterans' benefits and base access privileges are under review. But the real victory came when Colonel Harrison handed me an official letter. "Your battalion has submitted a formal request to provide military honors for your wedding ceremony. They've also volunteered to serve as your escort if your family situation remains complicated." I stared at the letter, tears blurring my vision. 12 soldiers from my deployment unit had formally requested leave to attend my wedding and serve as honor guard. Sergeant Johnson, who'd pulled me out of that IED explosion in Kandahar, had written a personal note: "Ma'am, you've got our six. Always." The next morning, Father Santos called with an apology that came 2 weeks too late. "Jessica, I realize now that I was given false information about your fiancé. I've spoken with the Archdiocese about the situation, and they've recommended that I perform the ceremony as originally planned. But I'd already moved beyond needing his approval. Captain Rodriguez had connected me with Chaplain Major Williams at Fort Hamilton, a military chaplain who specialized in interfaith ceremonies and had no patience for family politics interfering with legitimate unions. Any couple who can survive combat deployments and family sabotage campaigns deserves to have their love celebrated," Chaplain Williams told me. "It would be my honor to officiate your wedding." The most surprising support came from an unexpected source. My cousin Sophia called in tears, having finally worked up the courage to defy the family conspiracy. "Jessica, I told my mom everything Grandpa Roberto made me say to you. She's furious. She said what he did was evil and that she's coming to your wedding no matter what anyone else says." That phone call opened the floodgates. Over the next few days, I received calls from family members I hadn't heard from in months. My younger brother David, who'd been studying abroad and missed most of the drama, was appalled when he learned what had happened. "Dad's lost his mind. I'm flying back for your wedding and I'm bringing friends." Aunt Carmen, my mother's sister, who'd been excluded from the Save Our Jessica campaign, was furious when she learned about the group chat. "Your mother called me crying yesterday. She said your father threatened to divorce her if she attended your wedding, but she's coming anyway. She said she'd rather lose her marriage than lose her daughter." Even some of my father's allies began to waver as the full scope of his deception became clear. Uncle Carlos, who'd initially supported the sabotage campaign, called with an awkward apology. "Mija, I thought we were just trying to slow things down so you could think more clearly. I didn't know about the private investigator or the lies to your commanding officer. That crossed lines that shouldn't be crossed. The legal consequences for my father were swift and decisive. Captain Rodriguez's complaint to the Inspector General resulted in a formal censure and the revocation of his base access privileges at multiple installations. The private investigator he'd hired faced potential charges for illegal surveillance, and several family members who'd participated in the harassment campaign received official warnings about interfering with active duty personnel. But the most satisfying resolution came from an unexpected source. Michael's parents, who'd been quietly enduring months of surveillance and harassment, filed their own legal complaint for stalking and invasion of privacy. Mr. Chen, it turned out, was not just a restaurant owner, but also a successful businessman with excellent attorneys.
Your father picked the wrong family to mess with, Mr. Chen told me during a video call. We've been in America for 3 generations and we know our rights. We've filed restraining orders and are pursuing civil damages for the emotional distress caused by his campaign of harassment. 3 days before our wedding, I received a formal letter of apology from my father, written by his attorney as part of a legal settlement. The words were hollow and legally crafted, but they included an agreement to cease all interference with my marriage and to stay away from both me and Michael's family. Standing in my hotel room at Fort Hamilton, the night before my wedding, I looked at my dress hanging in the closet. Not my grandmother's gown, which felt tainted by family betrayal, but a new dress I'd chosen with Michael's sister, who'd become like a real sister to me over the past 2 weeks. Tomorrow, I would walk down the aisle escorted by Staff Sergeant Johnson and 11 other soldiers who'd proven that chosen family could be stronger than blood family. My battalion brothers would provide the honor guard my father had tried to deny me. Michael's parents would sit in the front row next to my mother, who'd found her courage despite threats of divorce. The wedding I'd originally planned had been destroyed by family sabotage, but the wedding I was about to have would be infinitely more meaningful, surrounded by people who'd proven their loyalty through actions rather than words, celebrated by a community that understood the true meaning of honor and commitment. How does it feel to have your military family step up when your biological family let you down? A reporter from Army Times asked, as Michael and I posed for photos after the ceremony. It feels like I finally understand what real loyalty looks like, I replied, looking at the 12 soldiers standing at attention behind us in full dress uniform. This day taught me that family isn't just about blood relations. It's about the people who show up when it matters most, who stand by your side when others try to tear you down. The wedding had been everything I had dreamed of and nothing like what I had originally planned. Instead of walking down the aisle on my father's arm, I'd been escorted by Staff Sergeant Johnson and Sergeant Martinez, 2 soldiers who'd risked their lives alongside me in Afghanistan. Instead of my extended family filling the church, I was surrounded by my battalion brothers and sisters, Michael's loving family, and the few relatives who'd found the courage to defy my father's campaign. My mother sat in the front row, tears streaming down her face as she watched me marry the man I loved despite months of family pressure to abandon him. She'd filed for separation from my father the day after learning the full scope of his deception, telling me, "I raised you to be strong and independent. I won't let his hatred destroy the daughter I'm proud of." The reception was held in the base community center, decorated with both American and Chinese lanterns to honor both our cultures. Michael's parents had embraced me completely after learning about the harassment campaign, treating me like the daughter they'd always wanted. Mrs. Chen had even taught me to make Michael's favorite dumplings, saying, "Real family teaches you recipes, not rejection." 6 months later, the ripple effects of our story continued to spread. Captain Rodriguez told me that our case had prompted the Inspector General to launch a broader investigation into family harassment of military personnel. 3 other service members had come forward with similar stories of relatives using military networks to sabotage relationships or careers they disapproved of. Sergeant Major Kim's group had grown from 12 members to over 50 as word spread that resources existed for military personnel facing family rejection. Your story gave people hope,
she told me. It showed them that choosing love over family approval doesn't mean choosing isolation. My father never attended any family events after the wedding. The legal consequences of his harassment campaign, combined with losing his base access privileges and facing potential criminal charges, had effectively ended his ability to influence military personnel. Several family members who'd participated in his conspiracy faced their own legal troubles, and the private investigator he'd hired lost his license after authorities discovered multiple cases of illegal surveillance. But the most profound change was in how I understood family itself. The soldiers who'd escorted me down the aisle remained close friends, checking in regularly and celebrating anniversaries with us. Michael's parents became the loving in-laws I'd always hoped for, including me in family traditions and making me feel genuinely welcome. Michael and I built our own traditions, ones based on mutual respect rather than cultural conformity, on chosen loyalty rather than obligated submission. We hosted holidays for other military families who'd been estranged from relatives, creating a community of people who understood that sometimes the family you choose is stronger than the family you're born into. 3 years later, when our daughter Alina was born, she was surrounded by honorary aunts and uncles in military uniform, by grandparents who celebrated her mixed heritage instead of rejecting it, by a community that measured family bonds by love and support rather than blood and tradition. Sometimes the people who try to protect you from making mistakes are actually trying to protect themselves from losing control. Sometimes standing up for your right to choose your own path becomes standing up for everyone who faces pressure to conform to someone else's vision of their life. And sometimes, when you refuse to let family manipulation define your worth, you discover something more powerful than blood ties. You discover that real family is built through mutual respect, unwavering support, and the courage to stand together when the world tries to tear you apart. The father who refused to walk me down the aisle taught me that biology doesn't guarantee loyalty, but the battalion that escorted me instead taught me that honor and commitment can create bonds stronger than genetics ever could.
Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.